I know you're eager to start posting your products, but there's actually a lot more to it than that. And I think this is where a lot of people go wrong with their shop. They will go into it with unrealistic expectations or maybe just not much background knowledge on what it means to run a business or an Etsy shop. I told you in the first episode that it's going to get real and real in depth, so there's a lot to consider. And I am not trying to scare you away, although I have done that in the past. Oops. Today we're discussing what you should know or should consider before starting an Etsy shop that actually have nothing to do with your products. This is episode 2 of my How to Start an Etsy Shop series, so I would highly recommend starting at episode 1 if you haven't already. As I post new episodes, they'll be in a playlist, and I'll link that in the description box or at the end of each video. I don't care what anybody says, an Etsy shop is a business, and even if you're a hobbyist, you have to treat it like a business. Says who? Says me and the IRS. Or whatever the tax authority in your country is called. Even hobbyists need to make a profit in order to afford more supplies. And hobbyist or not, you don't want to be evading taxes. I mean, you probably want to be, but you shouldn't. Don't. But that's about it on the tax discussion today because we've got a lot to cover and I am not an accountant. I have 8 subtopics or questions for you today and I will timestamp them in the description box. However, I would strongly encourage you to not skip them. Only use those time codes if you want to refer back to them later or rewatch a certain part at the end. Number 1 question to ask yourself, is Etsy even the right place for me? Here's the elephant in the room that many of us don't want to consider. I certainly don't, because that means you don't need me anymore. But then again, most of my advice and things I talk about can apply to other places as well. As far as like business things go, Etsy really isn't that different to selling anywhere else. And it's not exactly a big secret that Etsy seems to be becoming more saturated and more filled with mass-produced quote-unquote junk as the years go by. And seemingly lots of sellers have left, which is not entirely a bad thing for you or for them. Shoot, I even opened a Shopify last year in addition to my Etsy shop. But does all that mean you shouldn't even bother? No, of course not. You should still bother. I will try to be as concise as possible because this could be its own video entirely. And this debate specifically between Etsy and Shopify is kind of what blew up my TikTok account in the first place, which is what led to me making this channel. So I have a lot to say, but I'm going to try to break it down and include more things than just Etsy and Shopify. Etsy is not the only place to sell handmade goods, although it is probably the most popular and is a household name now in 2023, but it is not going to be the best for absolutely everyone, and that's okay. You know what? I should make a chart. This will be a little bit easier. Some of you are visual, I'm sure. I am not so much visual, but I'm trying. Yes, I am a millennial, and no, I do not have the patience to do things like this on a computer, so we're doing it on paper like a dinosaur. These are not the only options either, but I have listed 6 categories at least of places you can sell handmade things. We're gonna rank them from 1 to 6 based on these categories. So we've got easy to get into, so that could be something that has a small learning curve or you don't need any experience or connections. And then we'll have what is the cheapest as far as fees or rent. Like if you have at an antique mall, for example, you're going to have your booth rent. Which ones are the most lucrative if done correctly? Which ones are less business and more craft? So I have gotten this question before. Etsy is too much business for me. Where else can I sell? And then which ones have the most potential to scale? So how can you keep on the same platform and make more sales? Which kind of can go along with the ones that are most lucrative. So we'll start with the ones that are easy to get into. So I'll just go through and explain each one. So for Etsy, anybody can make an account, anybody can make listings, so that's fairly easy. Same with eBay, Amazon, and Mercari. The problem with those is that they are not specifically for handmade products, but they are just as easy, I think, to get onto as Etsy, but they also don't have listing fees, so I guess that would go into this category. Basically, they do have fees, but you don't have to pay up front like the 20 cents like you do on Etsy. So for craft fairs, they can be easy to get into, but not exactly, especially the ones that are more high-end or going to have more foot traffic. They are going to be more difficult to get into. You probably have to know somebody to get into a lot of these fairs, or you're gonna be invited. And for antique malls is gonna be a little bit more difficult, again, because The ones near you may not have open booths, or they may not accept handmade sellers. Some only take actual antiques, which are the ones that I like to go to personally, but some of them do let people sell like their upcycled furniture and that kind of stuff that could kind of qualify as antique. And then the next one, you're gonna have your boutiques or wholesaling to other businesses or doing something like fair. Again, those are gonna be a bit more difficult. You're gonna have to know somebody or have clout, if you will, to get into those. And then you have your own website like Shopify. You could also go with like a Big Cartel or WooCommerce or even a Squarespace, something like that, just your own website in general. Anybody can make one, but it is not easy to get traffic to. And for your own website, no matter which hosting provider you use, you're going to have to bring all of your own traffic, whether that's through ads or through your social media following. So you can't just throw things on there and expect people to stumble upon it like you can with Etsy or eBay, Amazon, Mercari. So for this row, the easiest to get into, I'm going to say the easiest one to get into, like start listing things on, is going to be eBay, Amazon, and Mercari. So that's number one. Then number two is going to go to Etsy, because you can just list things on there. You don't have to talk to anybody else. You can just do it. But you do have to pay the fee up front, and you still have to kind of learn a few things about how it works. And then number three, I'm gonna go with craft fairs, actually. So you can find some that are open to pretty much everyone, but the ones that are the easiest to get into are probably not gonna be the most lucrative, because you're gonna be competing with the direct sales people, you know what I'm talking about? And then you have to set up a booth and go spend a day or two, or sometimes 3, depending on how long it is, like actually selling your things, like being a salesperson, which is why I don't do those very often. For number 4, I'm gonna put that for Shopify, because you can make one without asking anybody else. It's just not as easy to immediately start making sales like the other ones. And then as far as antique malls and wholesale stuff, I think they're pretty even, but I'm gonna say that this category as a whole is gonna be a bit easier to get into. Just because there are a lot of options, there's a lot more places locally that you could find that would possibly take handmade things depending on where you live. Some parts of the country and some like bigger city places are going to have more opportunities for this probably than small towns and stuff like that. And then you may not have antique malls near you at all. They may not even accept handmade sellers. There's a few near me that do, but I personally would not go into that. But if you make bigger stuff, like you redo furniture, like I mentioned earlier, then antique malls are probably the place to go. All right, the next category is which one is going to be the cheapest. So for Etsy, you're going to have the 20 cents upfront per listing, and then you also have the payment fee, which I will put on the screen because I can't remember it off the top of my head. And then you also have the 6.5% transaction fee, basically Etsy's cut. The payment fee goes to the payment processor, the credit card company, then the 6.5 goes to Etsy. eBay, Amazon, Mercari are going to be pretty similar as far as the percentage fee, but you do not have the listing fee up front like you do with Etsy. I believe on eBay and Amazon, the fee percentage is different based on your category, but Mercari, it's the same for everybody. And craft fairs are going to depend. Some are free, some are $20, and some are thousands of dollars if they are highly attended. Antique malls are going to charge you a booth rent per month, and then also or a percentage of your sales. So that's going to depend on how much you sell and the area and how much they charge for rent. And then for boutiques, wholesale, fair, anything like that, you're looking at about 50% for the wholesale margin. But then again, you don't have to buy the packaging, you don't have to ship the stuff, you don't have to merchandise it or deal with customers. They do all that. So while it is a bigger percentage up front, like the payment, you will probably make more money off of a wholesale order versus several orders on Etsy or anywhere else, because they are going to order a higher quantity. And then with Shopify and other places like that, I'm only familiar with Shopify because I have one myself. The fees are significantly lower than Etsy, depending on how much you sell. That's the thing. So there's a flat fee of at least $29 a month. my shop is not big enough to go up to the next level, which is a bit more expensive. And you could get apps that could add to that cost per month. And there is the payment transaction fee that goes to the credit card company, but you do not have the 20-cent listing fee, and you do not have the 6.5% fee like on Etsy. But you may spend more money in advertising because of Shopify and how it works. It's not a marketplace. But if you only sell a few items per month, the fee is probably going to be more than the Etsy fees for only selling a few items per month. At least they were for me for a long time. And for things like craft fairs, antique malls, stuff like that, you pay if you make a sale or not. So if you set up at a craft fair and you don't sell a darn thing, you still have paid the fee to rent a space. So I'm going to put a varies right here. So I think I'm going to go at this with the perspective of myself as a full-time seller instead of a new seller, because a new seller, the cheapest is going to be something like Etsy or Amazon, because you don't pay anything if you don't make any sales. And if you're new at this, you're probably not going to make many sales up front. So I'm going to say that for me personally, the cheapest place to sell is Shopify, just because of I make more sales than would be necessary to equal that amount on Etsy. I hope that makes sense. Basically, if I sold the same amount of items on Etsy as I do now on Shopify, I would pay significantly less fees on Shopify than I would on Etsy. But if I only sold a few things, it would be way more expensive on Shopify. If you already have a shop, you can go into your Etsy payment account and check that. So like if you have just a few sales, your fees that you've paid to Etsy probably are not going to be very much, so it may not be worth getting a Shopify at that point. And then I'm going to say the next cheapest place probably is going to be eBay, Amazon, and Mercari, if those are a good place for your specific products. So Amazon is taking off a little bit with the handmade stuff, but I am not the person to ask about that because I have not used it myself. But as far as the fees and things, they are a bit less than Etsy. So I'm going to say the next cheapest actually is probably a craft fair. If you pick the right ones, like I know which kinds of craft fairs or vendor events work for my niche and my target audience, so I will only do those. I will not do your like PTA school craft fairs, like high school craft fairs or whatever, because the people that attend those are not my target audience. So I would only pick, like I do veg fest, like vegan festivals and stuff like that. So those are going to be the best for me and the cheapest, because I will make my booth fee several times over. And then the next cheapest is going to be Etsy. I could make a month's worth of sales in one day at a craft fair, but it's not guaranteed. But it's also not guaranteed to make any specific amount of sales on Etsy either, because it fluctuates. And then this one's tough. So this one, as far as antique malls versus boutiques or wholesale, antique malls, you put your stuff in there not knowing if it's going to sell or not. But if you sell to a boutique wholesale or you use a website like Fair, you get paid up front. So I'm going to say that those are going to be cheaper, because you get, even though it is 50%, you get paid up front. Whereas you could sell like one thing for $5 at an antique mall and then have to pay like $200 for that month in rent. So I'm going to say that's number 6. But again, that also depends on your niche, the things you sell. If they would work at an antique mall, then that would be the best for you. So this is just, these numbers are arbitrary. I'm just trying to explain, okay? Hopefully that's clear. And then which ones are the most lucrative if you do them correctly and basically if you know what you're doing. So I am actually going to say that boutiques and wholesale or the Fair website are going to be the most lucrative, because basically if you are getting sales on these places, then you are making at least several $100s per order, because they have to pay up front and there is a minimum that you are in charge of setting. Like you can make that whatever you want it to be. And then I'm going to say that number 2 is actually craft fairs, because it is not unheard of to like completely sell out of a booth at a craft fair, depending on, again, the target audience and what people are looking for. But in order to make a full-time income off of just craft fairs, which I would not try to do, you would have to plan like a year in advance and sign up for them as soon as they come out to get a good spot and to be guaranteed a spot in the good ones, the ones that you know you're going to make a lot of money at. And then that's going to have to be like an every weekend kind of thing. Like I know somebody that used to do them full time, and they literally were traveling the entire East Coast for most of the year, like all summer pretty much, to make a full-time income. That sounds like it could be fun depending on your lifestyle. And I'm going to say that Shopify is probably the next most lucrative because of it having cheaper fees, and you have a lot more freedom to expand and sell different products. So like in my shop, I hand make almost everything, but if I wanted to sell like accessories to the things I make that are not handmade, I could do that on Shopify, but you cannot do that on Etsy. So there's more potential there. And the marketing with Shopify for return customers is also a lot better because they have the integrated emails, which I will discuss later on in regards to Etsy. Don't have time for that today. And I'm going to put Etsy at number 4 for the most lucrative because Etsy is like a snowball effect. So the more sales you get, the more sales you're going to get. And that also kind of works on like eBay and Amazon. I don't think that's a thing with Mercari. I've sold a bit on there and I don't think it has the same kind of algorithm. So since eBay, Amazon, Mercari have a wider audience and you can reach people internationally with eBay and Amazon, I think Mercari is only in the US, but you have a much wider audience for those obviously than you do an antique mall. So I'm going to put those at number 5 and antique malls at number 6. I don't know why I even put antique malls on this list, to be honest, but for some people, they could be the best. Okay, then now for the less business, more craft, probably what you're waiting for. So this is assuming that you are doing absolutely everything yourself. You don't have anybody helping you, you don't have like family involved, your spouse or whatever, it's all you. So which one is going to be basically less marketing and advertising and all that kind of stuff for you, and just you can focus on creating. So for antique malls and then like boutiques and wholesale, those you are probably going to be promoting them, like you're going to post about them on social media to try to get traffic to them, but you are not generally responsible for making the sales. Especially like with boutiques and stuff, it is they buy it from you. So once they buy it from you, the onus for you to market them is on the store you sold it to. Although, again, it's good to advertise them yourself as well, because then if they sell more, then you'll sell more to them in wholesale. And then with antique malls, you kind of have to go in there and merchandise the stuff, but you're not really responsible for selling it. You don't have to go there every day. I'm pretty sure you can just kind of let it be. And at craft fairs, you have to be a salesperson, but you don't have to do all of the back end stuff online necessarily if you only choose to do that. But with the craft fair, you could just make stuff for months and then sell it, you know, a couple weekends a month or a couple weekends a year even. So I think I'm going to put craft fairs on number 1 for less business, more craft. And then antique malls is actually probably going to be number 2 for that. Even though, keep in mind all the other things, like they're hard to get into and they're probably not going to be the cheapest. And I think I'm going to put number 3 as wholesale. You just have to seek out places that will wholesale from you and keep up with your fair account, but you don't have to worry about making a lot of individual sales like you would on Etsy or another platform. And then I'm going to put Etsy at number 4. Because Etsy is a marketplace, it's a search engine, people are going there with the intention of finding products like yours if you can make them. So part of that bigger fee is the built-in marketing and access to their tens of millions of customers. But you still have to do your keywords and SEO and do photography and that kind of stuff on the back end in order to get access to the tens of millions of people on Etsy. And then I would say other marketplaces are going to be number 5, so they're going to be a bit more difficult to manage and keep up with because you still need to have amazing photography and know how to do descriptions and all of those kind of things. And the keyword research is going to be a bit different than for Etsy. And they may not, even though Amazon has the handmade aspect, people don't typically go there in search of handmade items specifically. If they happen upon a handmade Amazon item, great. And then Shopify is going to be number 6 because you have to do a lot yourself with Shopify. So despite it being the cheapest as far as fees go, if you sell a lot, you have to set up the website and like basically build it. It's not difficult in terms of building a website in comparison to some other places. It's not the easiest, but you still have to do all the back end stuff and you are responsible for absolutely everything. So on Etsy, if something goes wrong, like the customer has an issue, they can contact Etsy. But if they have an issue or something with the website, it is your website, therefore your responsibility to fix it. So your potential to scale is, I wouldn't worry about this one if you're just starting out, because you can do all 6 of these if you want to. And most people are going to start on Etsy and then scale up to other places, but you can scale within Etsy itself. You don't have to really do anything special once you start making like a ton of sales. So there are no additional fees. They don't charge you more if you make a lot of sales like Shopify. I think at a certain point, you're gonna have to get a higher level of their service, like pay more per month. And it's going to be easier for you to scale on Etsy because of the algorithm. If you get a product that starts doing very well, it's going to get recommended and take up that snowball effect. So I'm going to say that Etsy has the most potential to scale. And then I'm going to put Shopify at number 2 for that, because even though you may have to pay like a $20 or $30 more per month, not that big of a deal if you're scaling up, but Shopify also will handle your POS or your point of sale system if you decide to open a brick and mortar store or start doing craft fairs and stuff like that. And it'll all be integrated, so it is pretty seamless, I think, to just go from Shopify to other avenues. And like with the example I gave earlier with my shop, if you want to add more things that are not handmade, like you want to order them from other shops or whatever, you can put them on Shopify, but you cannot put them on Etsy. So I guess Etsy and Shopify could be equal in this regard. And I'm actually going to say number 3 is wholesale, specifically Fair. I've heard of a lot of shops that get accepted to Fair, which if you have, please give me your link because I've tried and I'm still on the wait list. But Fair can be the difference between your shop making like a part-time and a full-time income. Like if there are businesses looking for your specific products on Fair and you get a couple orders, well, your orders are going to be at least several $100s depending on what you set your minimum as. So Fair is basically like Etsy, but for places that want to wholesale your products to sell in their stores. And then I'm going to say craft fairs is number 4. That's really limited by you and your time and how people respond at the craft fairs that you go to and how well you've narrowed down your target audience. There are specialty markets, like I know there are like oddity markets that I would like to go to, but they're not in my area. There's also like vintage markets, if you have like vintage style things, or in my area, and I think there's one like out west also, the punk flea markets, if you have like alternative kind of things, which I think some of you do, I would look into those. And then number 5 is going to be eBay, Amazon, Mercari, so you have access to a larger audience. But as far as I'm aware, the algorithm on those does not work quite like Etsy, except like Amazon. Actually, fun fact, in the middle of this very long video, the technology behind Etsy is actually created by Amazon. So I think it's hilarious. People are like, oh, I don't want to support Amazon anymore, so I'm going to go to Etsy. Well, you kind of are. Amazon owns most of the internet, so sorry to disappoint. And then antique malls, again, unfortunately, is at number 6. Unless you can get into more than one antique mall or something like that, something similar to an antique mall, you're probably not going to get anywhere fast with just one. So these numbers, again, are arbitrary. Like, I wouldn't use this as a hard and fast rule. Like, go with the one that's going to work for you, like your lifestyle and your business and what you're selling. So like I said, even though I dunked on antique malls not being the best, they may be the best for you depending on your products. And also, if antique malls don't think your stuff is going to sell, they're probably not going to let you have a booth. I guess I should have added a different line for potential customer base. Let's do that, actually. I'm thinking this video is going to be long enough. So your biggest potential customer base by a long shot is going to be eBay, Amazon, Mercari. Specifically Amazon. I think Amazon and eBay make Etsy look like an ant. I'm going to put Etsy at number 2 just because the customer base is built in. People are searching on there, but the potential for customers is unlimited, really, with Shopify. Nobody's going to stumble upon your Shopify on accident. especially if you don't hire somebody to do SEO, because SEO for Shopify is very difficult to rank for. Which that's like a bit over my head as far as explaining it. But even though like anybody could find your Shopify like through your social media, for example, only so many people are going to show up at a craft fair or an antique mall, you know. So I'm going to put Shopify at number 3. And then I'm going to put the boutiques and wholesale a bit higher than potential customer base, because these are going to be open year-round, like every day, mostly every day, like maybe 5 or 6 days a week. And with fair especially, you could, I don't know if fair is international, honestly, but you still have access to a lot of shops that are not in your specific area, like craft fairs or antique malls. So then the difference between craft fairs and antique malls really depends on how much you're going to put into it. Some antique malls, like that I've been to, for example, have a lot of foot traffic. Like they can get quite crowded sometimes if they're really good. And then some antique malls I've been to, I have never seen another human in there besides the person working. So that's kind of a toss-up. Then craft fairs depends on where it is, when it is, if it's raining, for example. But you can do more of them, but then again, antique malls are open most days of the week, whereas craft fairs are like basically for one weekend at the most, but you can do multiple of them, so kind of equal here. And also craft fairs in most parts of the US, unless you live in like the desert, they're only going to be like in the summer and fall, whereas antique malls are generally open all year round. But I'm going to go with craft fairs having the most potential customer base because you can do multiple of them. And then antique malls are again getting number 6. But again, if you have something that is big and maybe difficult to carry around, you probably don't want to be carting that around to a bunch of craft fairs. So now my stuff is not big or heavy by any means, but it is still a pain to set up at a craft fair. But for most handmade things, I am going to almost definitively say that Etsy is the best, because it is specifically a place that people are going to for handmade products, and you don't have to have any prior experience, you don't have to know anybody, you don't have to name drop or pay like, you know, hundreds of dollars to get a spot. Like it's there, anybody can make an account. And since it is so easy to get into, you can use that to basically launch you into anything else. Even having, I didn't put having your own brick and mortar store on here because that's not a possibility for the majority of people, especially just starting out, because that's very expensive and you're going to have the same limitations as you would with some of these other like antique malls and stuff where you're limited to foot traffic in your area. So this is all just my opinion. If you disagree, I'm sure most of you will disagree with at least something that I said about this, but I just wanted to kind of explain the differences and why Etsy may not be the best for everybody and why there's not a certain absolute best for everyone. So there you go, some nuance on the internet. Second question to ask yourself is, do I have time to do this, or can I make time to do this? Unfortunately, you cannot neglect your other responsibilities, you know, like your family and your day job, your household chores. If your schedule is already packed and you're always on the go, you're going to have to sacrifice some other things. So start right now and see how much time you can set aside to work on your shop, whether that's an hour a day after you put your kids to bed or when they're taking a nap, or maybe you'll have a whole weekend day or half of a weekend day. Just keep in mind that beyond your initial setup, you'll have to continue this schedule as well, because there are going to be maintenance things to do and orders to fill from here on. The third question you want to ask yourself is, am I okay with spending this amount of time with no guarantee of an immediate return? Even if you do follow all of my advice to a T, it still may take some time to get some sales, let alone enough to recoup your expenses or your initial investment. I would go so far as to say that you should not expect a return for at least a few months, and most businesses, whether on Etsy or otherwise, do not make a profit in the first year. And a subtopic for this one is about digital products. I'm going to try to remember to include like things specifically about digital shops here and there as I go along through the series, and they still could be beneficial even if you aren't planning to open a digital product shop. But there is a lot of misleading or unrealistic information out there about making a digital product shop on Etsy. So like selling planner pages or sticker pages or whatever else that people digital stuff. I don't know how many videos that I've seen come up on my recommended on YouTube alone saying that you will make tens of thousands of dollars by selling digital products or selling Canva templates or whatever else. And they'll also say that this is passive income. If you're just listening to this, I am making air quotes around passive income. Because both of those promises that you're going to make tens of thousands of dollars and that it's passive income are BS. It is true that some shops make a killing off of digital products, and at least one of the top 10 shops on Etsy is a digital store, but that alone does not guarantee that you are going to make a killing off of a digital store on Etsy. I know quite a few other shops. I don't know the person that runs that top 10 one, but I know other ones, and yeah, it's far from passive. You will still need to be available to answer messages, which are very frequent with digital shops because people don't know how they work. You'll still have to keep making new listings, researching keywords, updating SEO, and whatever else you need to do on the back end. I'm not trying to tell you like that if you should or should not do a digital shop if you're thinking about it, but it's less work for a digital shop, like as far as you don't have to be like making products and doing things like that because it's all on the computer, but it's not less time necessarily. On to number 4, if you're selling physical products, first of all, do you have enough space to store them? Or second, if you scale up and expand or start making a lot of sales, do you have room physically to expand? I know a few handmade sellers that use their kitchen table only and make a decent part-time, sometimes even full-time income. So it's definitely possible if your items are not like physically large, but it's not easy. I started my shop with just this shelving unit and a table in my bedroom, and that's it. But it was a nightmare because I had to do everything in that one room that was, I think, about the same size as this one. And it had one more window, so even less wall space, but better light. I do miss that. Once I started to get serious and was making decent sales, it got cramped real quick, and like physically and mentally. I felt like I couldn't move, I couldn't expand, I couldn't get more product, I couldn't make anything new really or buy new supplies because I did not have room. So once I was able to move my bedroom stuff and my personal things into a different room and expand a little bit in that same room with more shelves and stuff, that was pretty much the first like turning point of my business. I was able to do more, make more product. I had a place to store things that I had finished, so I didn't have to like either make them up and like put stuff in bags and like stack it on other things. I had like a dedicated little space for all my finished things. So if you have a spare room or maybe an extra corner of your bedroom or the dining room or something that you could use as your space to create and store your products, that may mean other members of your family or people in your household kind of making do with that. And I would definitely have those conversations beforehand before you start taking up whole areas of the house. And then of course, if you grow beyond that space, especially if you just have like your kitchen table, what are you going to do when that's no longer feasible and you can't keep up with that small amount of space? Are you going to be able to clear out another room in your house or move even like something to support this if you are that serious about it? And if all of your stuff is handmade, would you have space for like a freelance employee or a contract employee? Like that's the more correct term, a contract employee. Like not a full-time person, you probably won't be doing that anytime soon. But if you have somebody come help, even like a family member, is there even enough room for them to come do that? I'm actually working on expanding into the next bedroom. Our house has 3 bedrooms, 2 on the 2nd floor, which is great because our master is on the 1st floor. So I have total separation. Like the whole upstairs is mine for my business, and I am working on expanding into the spare room, which was previously a pile all of the stuff that we haven't put away yet room because we moved here like a year ago. But if you followed my channel and seen my other vlogs, you know that I've been pretty busy and I didn't have time to do that or even start working on it. It was just piled with boxes up until like a week ago, so I am finally getting that done. Moving my computer and my printer and stuff over there and just keeping this room as like a production room for my sewing. But if my business grows beyond that, well, I have quite a bit of room to grow here. Like my stock closet is not super full, so I should be okay for a while. But if I outgrow this, we would probably have to move because that may be cheaper than getting a separate, like a studio space or something, because those aren't quite as expensive as apartments, but still expensive. Number 5, again, if you're going to be selling physical products, are you able to get to the post office regularly, or are you able to make arrangements for this regularly? And thankfully, if you're in the US, USPS will do package pickups from your house. I have heard quite a few issues of them picking stuff up like on time, so I would maybe give yourself a day or two extra on your processing time just in case. But that is a godsend for those who are disabled or have kids and can't really leave to go take things to the post office, or maybe you live far away from the post office. It is preferable to have a 1 day or like 1 to 3 day processing time for shipping things on Etsy, but it is not essential. So if you can't make it to the post office, like, you know, every 1 to 3 days, then do your best to go like once a week. But even then, that is iffy, because if you miss that, could cause some problems, because Etsy does not like if you ship after the day you said you would. Basically, if you have reliable transportation, which not everybody does, or just some way to get your orders to the post office, you're perfectly fine. Like I said, they have pickup. Some other couriers may have pickup as well. I'm not sure about other countries. Maybe UPS and FedEx have, but I don't really use them because I find that USPS is the cheapest. And we'll talk about this more in a future episode, but as far as that goes, if you've never shipped things like that before, you absolutely need a scale and a label printer. That's like a non-negotiable in my opinion. Some people say you don't, you can just use a regular printer, but it looks a lot better if you use a label printer and you need a scale to see how much the thing weighs. That's going to save you a lot of money, like almost 50% on shipping costs if you print your own labels versus going and standing in line at the post office. And then you also don't have to type in the tracking numbers. You can just, it'll just automatically do it on Etsy. So if you're thinking about like going ahead and getting some stuff before I do a video about the stuff you need, go ahead and get a label printer and a scale. Which brings me to number 6, do I have enough money to pay for things up front? That could be materials, supplies, equipment that you need. Like, for example, my niche involves sewing, so do you have money to buy a sewing machine, a Cricut machine, whatever else? If you don't already have one, you'll have to pay upfront for your listing fees, and also if you do print on demand, you'll have to pay for those out of pocket at first as well, because Etsy won't have deposited your money yet to the print on demand, so keep that in mind. You also have your shipping materials like your boxes, your mailers. Don't count on using the free mailers at the post office, especially if your stuff is small and light. Please do not use priority mail mailers for things that are light if you're shipping within the US, because it is way more expensive. But again, I'll talk about that in a future video all about shipping. And to go along with this, do you have enough money to pay your bills if you're maybe thinking about taking less hours at work or making this your full-time job? Do you have money saved up to pay your bills for X number of months, whether that's 3 months, 6 months, or a year? Then number 7, how much do I need to sell in order to make my desired income? So whether that is you're trying to replace your day job and go full-time, or if you're trying to just do part-time, like maybe half of your income, you need to figure out how much that's going to be and how much you need to sell in order to get there. So you'll have fees, shipping costs, your overhead costs, all of your supplies, and of course your self-employment taxes. It's good to have that number in mind ahead of time, so that way you can keep an eye on your sales, and when they start to cross over, then at that point you can reevaluate and see if that amount is still going to be enough or if you need to shoot for more. I did not do this myself, but if I was smart, I would have waited until I had my magic number in mind and my sales were consistently over that, like probably for about 6 months, even to a year, before I quit my day job. The smart way to do that is if you have a full-time job and you're able to swing doing both of them at the same time, your job and your Etsy shop, to just try living off of your income from your Etsy shop once you get to that point, and then put your day job money into your savings account just as a backup in case you have a bad month on Etsy or whatever, something else happens. Then number 8, we talked about this at the end of the last episode, but what is my goal with my Etsy shop, or what am I trying to accomplish? So most people are going to call this your why, quote unquote, your WHY Like, why are you doing this? Why are you getting out of bed every morning to work on whatever it is you're doing? For some people, just the sole purpose of making money is going to drive them, but for some people, it's not. And I am one of those people. If I just had to do this for money alone, would not happen. I do not care. And some of you may be like, well, if the goal is not entirely to make money, then what could it be? Your goals could be like sharing your art with the world, or helping people be more organized, connecting with a certain community that you're a part of, or helping the planet, helping animals, something that your shop can contribute to that is basically something that is bigger than you, but that will connect with other people on an individual level, because you want to make a personal connection with your customers. That is how people are going to remember your shop and how they're going to come back again and again and be repeat customers. In addition to how this should not be about just making money, it also should not be about you making things, because that is selfish. Like, it's about you. It should be about something that's bigger than you, connecting with somebody else. Because like, I wouldn't connect with you if you just say, oh, I like making these things. Like, okay, that's cool, but why would I buy them? Hopefully you're picking up what I'm putting down. Stay tuned for the next episode, which is going to be about picking your niche and what products to sell, so stay tuned for that. Your homework for today is to write the answers to these questions. I would make a Google Doc, or you can handwrite them if you want to. That's going to help you process it a bit more than just like thinking about it in your head. Because it's pretty easy to say, oh yeah, I have enough room, or yeah, I only really need to make like $1,000 a month, right? And don't forget to discuss these things with the other people in your household, because finances and like you taking up space to do stuff affects them as well. And if I did not scare you away yet, I will see you back here for episode 3. Goodbye.